China is buying land, businesses, and building infrastructure all over the world. They are buying in Africa. They're buying in Cuba. They're buying in the US, Canada, and Europe. But what is the goal of the Chinese government? You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Let's have our focus today on China, but I also want to mention a few other issues. Let's begin right away with this. The Chinese company that bought the UK's Aston Villa Football Club is nearing the purchase of a Hollywood film producer behind the action films such as The Expendables and the Rambo sequels. What we have seen is a slow creep of infrastructure assets, businesses being purchased by Chinese corporations. And this has been a global situation. But in recent times, I've noticed a grand uptick in the speed, in the frequency as to which these are being purchased. And it seems like in the next few years, much of Hollywood will be owned by Chinese companies. Now, I would like to interject that there is a distinction. A person from China buying a home in, let's say, Vancouver or San Francisco, and they purchase the home, and they do so as an investment. Perhaps their child 5 years down the road will need a place to stay while they're going to school. So they purchase it, they rent it out, make an income off it. Then their child goes to live there. Perhaps they want to stay there permanently, or maybe they'll just come back after and they'll just continue to rent the house out. It doesn't matter. This is an individual investor purchasing, and I believe that's fine. That's totally fine. The problem is when you have these corporations, which are really just subsidiaries of the government, and they start buying not, condos, not homes. They start buying businesses. They start buying media. They start buying massive amounts of land, infrastructure. Then you start having a problem. And this goes for any country. That's the distinction. That's where I see the problem. And I don't want to see that line getting crossed. I'm not a politician. I don't make rules like this. I don't understand all the ins and outs. I just know that you could easily cross the line, and it's basically impossible to pull back without something very bad happening. That's what concerns me about this as we go on in these articles here, okay? And I want to know what you think about that. So please let me know in the comments. From buses and trucks to a $500 million golf resort, China is deepening its business footprint in Cuba, helping the fellow communist-run state survive a crisis in the oil benefactor Venezuela and insulate against a possible rollback of the U.S. detent. Now, what is important to note is that they obviously have had ties for quite some time, but I've noticed that the amount of money being spent here, look at this, Cuban imports from China reached a record $1.9 billion in 2015. That's 60% above the annual average for the previous decade. So their partnership is clearly stronger than ever. And this is showing you that they want to do business with China. They want to expand that. And another thing to note here is that you had seen Obviously, for decades, the US and Cuba were at this stalemate. And then you saw the sort of opening up to Cuba. But just before Obama left office, he signed one of those wonderful executive orders, and it was to end wet foot, dry foot, which I thought was very interesting, very surprising. And I'm still unsure exactly why that was done and why it was done at that time, considering the previous actions. Anyway, so this right here is talking about basically the influence of China and Cuba and also the US. A deterioration in the US-China relations under Trump could also lead Beijing to dig in deeper into Cuba. And I do believe that could be true should there be some issues with the US and China coming up. China's growing presence gives its companies a head start over US competitors in Cuba opening up in there. I see that ultimately businesses are opening. I think it's going to be able to have, it could flourish. Might take some time, but I think ultimately having foreign investment in Cuba is a very good thing. You can't just open the floodgates, but if you can do this under their own terms, I think it's good news. I definitely think it's good news. I know as a Canadian, there are many, many tourists who are going all the time to Cuba. It's a very, very common place. So tourism is very big, and hopefully they can expand on that. It's a good thing for the economy. This here shows you the Chinese investment in Africa. It's massive, and it's probably impossible for you to read this, but in the bottom left corner, that legend down there, it shows you that the darker the color, the more of an investment. Okay, so the darkest color being more than $10 billion. So there are quite a few nations where they're spending billions and billions on different sectors. Anyway, it goes through them in this legend here: oil and natural gas, railroad, mining, different things. And if you're interested, I think it's pretty interesting to see all the different countries and all the different types of investment they're doing. It's not just, a one-trick pony. They seem to be getting into everything. And they're taking advantage of this opportunity. And seems like these countries want to work with China. I bet that they would rather have China than the US in there. Seems interesting anyway. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. The Australian government Thursday blocked the sale. This is actually old news. Blocked the sale of a portfolio of farmland the size of Kentucky to Chinese investors on national interest grounds. 4 separate groups linked to the Chinese-based investors had been dominating the bidding for properties accounting 2.5% of Australia's farming land. And it says it was worth so many millions of dollars. Anyway, it goes on. Part of the reason why this was rejected, and usually you don't have any sort of rejections taking place, but the government decided to step in. Look at this at the bottom paragraph. Part of the leased land is within this prohibited area, which is a weapons testing site in the state of South Australia. So you have this sort of, let's say, possible interaction. There could be some stepping on toes. There could be an issue here. And that's what concerns me. When you start to buy up all this infrastructure and land, there are different problems that you could encounter, and this is one of them. Think about all the other possibilities out there. I'm going to switch gears. Billionaire investor George Soros sold off investments in CVS, MGM, and Barrick Gold. Mr. Soros, who also moved recalibrating his portfolio after the presidential election, he opened up a small stake in Goldman Sachs because, of course, there's quite a few employees, big-time guys from Goldman Sachs in the U.S. government. Has always been, and seems to have increased a little bit recently, and cut Bank of America shares. So I wanted to show you that. Also, he eliminated the position of the iShares China Large Cap FX Exchange Traded Fund, the largest China-focused ETF in the US. Perhaps this is all Trump related, saying that Goldman Sachs is going to do better because of the obvious influence that they will have. China's not going to do as well because, or at least the tie between China and the US, because of the sort of negative outlook on those happening right now with everything Trump that we've seen from Trump. And then you have gold, Barrick Gold, seemingly, apparently according to Soros, going to take a nosedive. And there are others in here. But I would suggest that we never do what the billionaires are necessarily doing. You saw $5 billion worth of Bank of America stock being purchased by Warren Buffett during the financial crisis. And it was done so, after the financial crisis, done so to rescue Bank of America as sort of like a side bailout. But he was given preferred shares. It was not the same price you and I would pay. So how do you adjust your valuations? Goldman Sachs Group climbed to a record high on optimism. President Donald Trump's administration will spur trading and deal-making / corporate taxes and roll back costly regulations after installing the firm's executives in top government posts. And I do believe that Goldman Sachs will have a say in what happens in the financial sector as a result of this. But it's really, realistically, it's no different than what we've seen before because they've always had preferred treatment. They have donated massively to Obama in the past. You've seen that. So right there, to me, it's nothing new. Before I cover the article on the right, look at on the left, you see Rothschild, world seeing the greatest monetary policy experiment in history. I read the article. Basically, he gets into the fact that we're having monetary policy experiment in history. Not in a good way. He's saying this is crazy, basically. And is Rothschild saying that, which I find very funny. Okay, going to the article on the right, this is basically a friend, a longtime friend, or used to be a friend, George Soros' friend, Jim Rogers. I love Jim Rogers, read his books. He said this: governments are always looking out for themselves first, and it's the same old thing that has been going on for hundreds of years. The Indians did the same thing recently. They withdrew 86% of the currency in circulation. And they now have made it illegal to spend more than, I think it's $4,000 in cash. In France, I think it's $1,000 or €1,000. And he goes on and basically says that there's going to be a cashless society and they're going to track all of your purchases. They're going to make it very difficult for you to do business. They're going to make everything part of their world. They want to know everything that you do, tracking everything you do, this and that. He goes on. And it's really good to see someone this informative, this powerful, and when he speaks, basically a lot of people listen, and he's saying things like this. It's very, very good that he's out there talking like that. And then you have this, which is all about this in this case, Brazil, the universal basic income, where they are trying an experiment of a seaside town of about 150,000 people near Rio, saying that they would give them this monthly check, see how it goes, and they want to see if this is a better way to go than all the different welfare programs. Just give people, print it up, give it to people, and see how the economy goes. I think ultimately this is a very, very bad idea. But to sort of give in a little bit, I would say this is better than, I don't agree with it, but this is better than printing money in a QE and then just giving it to banks. I mean, that's completely wasteful. At least you give the money to the people. Hopefully they'll go out and spend it in the economy somehow. That's all for this video. If you found it informative, please give me a thumbs up. When you give me a thumbs up, it pushes these videos higher up in the YouTube search ranking. So I appreciate that very much when you do that. If you found the video informative, I know you'll find my book, The Money GPS, even more informative. You can look through the book. If you go over to Amazon, they have a look inside feature that will allow you to flip through the pages of the book and see if you like it. Take care.